Hi, thank you so much for being here today for our amazing talk by Dr. Lee. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction and then pass the floor over to you for your talk. So welcome everybody to today's talk. You Won't Break My Soul, Counteracting the Pushout of Black Women Teachers. Dr. Lee is currently a postdoctoral fellow here at Rutgers in the Department of Learning and Teaching. Focuses on racial equity and justice in education, urban teacher preparation, Black teacher sustainability, teachers' mental health and wellness, and Black feminist theory. Before coming to Rutgers, she earned a PhD from the University of North Carolina with a focus on urban education. The focus of her dissertation was the attrition of Black women teachers from urban classrooms. So I just said to Dr. Lee, I was looking through her CV this morning for this introduction, and it just went on for pages and pages and pages. She's done so much amazing work, but just to give you a brief summary to frame her work, she's an impressive early career scholar with multiple journal articles published in top journals, book chapters, book reviews, and even an entire book. Dr. Lee has several manuscripts in development, which we wish you the best of success with. Dr. Lee's received several funded grants, presented at conferences nationally and internationally, has been an invited speaker at many engagements, and has received many awards and honors. We are delighted to have you here today to share your research and to learn from and with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hey, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Yes. Thank you for coming. There's a lot of folks in here. I wasn't expecting this. Thank you for that introduction. That was beautiful. Yes, my name is Dr. Shanique Lee. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here, and I'm excited to talk about some of my research. What I'll be talking about today is a study that I'm particularly excited about. So I'm happy to share that with you. So as always, I like to start off by giving an overview of where we're going. And so this is how my talk is going to be set up. And I want to start by giving a little bit of context to the current study. So last summer, I started a podcast, and it was it was born out of my dissertation research. So like we just talked about, my dissertation was on the sustainability of Black women teachers. And my participants were Black women who were former teachers who engaged in this emancipatory sort of pedagogy, called them critical Black women teachers. And I sought to understand why they left the classroom. There is some research that talks about some of the reasons that they leave. Those are quantitative studies for the most part. And so I wanted to gain a more deep understanding of those contextual factors. And to collect data, my primary method was through sister circles, which are basically, it's a group dialogue curated specifically for Black women for us to engage in some critical dialogue around a topic or a shared experience. So this is my podcast. It's called The Time to Heal. And this was started because I'm gonna back up a little bit. I was supposed to talk about my dissertation after the podcast, so pretend like I didn't say any of that. So the point of this is, again, it was born last summer when I started, when basically two things dominated my whole being, my whole life, and that was my faith and my dissertation. So with my faith, it tells me that there is a time for everything under the sun. And for me, I love reading this chapter, Ecclesiastes 3, when I'm going through those more difficult, painful seasons in life, because it gives me hope that there will be a brighter tomorrow. But the issue that I noticed was that for a lot of Black women, we stay in those painful seasons a little bit longer than we probably need to. And for a multitude of reasons, be it, stereotypes, tropes, expectations, just needing to get stuff done, this pushes us into a sort of isolation. I'm gonna minimize that. it pushes us into a sort of isolation when we're going through those painful seasons. The show must go on. We can't take our cape off. We can't take off this mask of perfection. We have to stay strong and continue down, continue engaging in the work that needs to be done. So putting those two things together, I wanted to create a space for Black women to come together and really heal together, really push each other toward that season in our lives where it's time to start healing now. We don't have to continue holding on to these painful parts of our life. And it's interesting because, so this is a lot of information, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. I already asked for permission. My mom recently started therapy, and she's old school, so it took a lot of nudging, but she started. And she was telling me about her first session and how she didn't like her therapist because she was asking too many questions. And she talked about how she just wanted to talk about all the bad things that happened in my life. Tell me about your childhood, all these different traumas. And my mom eventually snapped and said, listen, I already buried all of that. We don't have to continue bringing that up. Like, that's gone, I buried it. And her therapist said, I can see that you buried it very deeply, but the problem is that you buried it alive. So it's still deep inside of you, but it's still manifesting in so many different ways in your life. And so that reaction that y'all just had is the reaction that I had. And they made me want to, again, just create a space for Black women, because a lot of us, of course, not all of us, a lot of us go through these hardships. We go through them alone. We feel like we're the only ones, and this isolation creates this tendency to bury these issues alive. So that's where Time to Heal came from. So last summer, again, was our first episode. And because this was meant to be like an extension of my dissertation research, obviously the first episode was on loving and leaving the classroom. And so my colleague Tiara and I, we invited 2 Black women who were former educators who left teaching specifically to take care of their mental health. And we just had a conversation about their experiences while they were teaching, some of the reasons that they left the classroom, and what it meant for them to leave the classroom, because teaching was such critical and urgent work for them. How did they sort of contend with that struggle of loving and leaving the classroom? But the goal for this particular study wasn't necessarily to understand all of that. The goal of this study was to see what their needs are and whether sister circles themselves can be used as an effective tool to help sustain Black women in teaching. And so when I was analyzing my data, we did the podcast, it went wonderful. We talked for way too long, it's like a 2-hour conversation. And when I transcribed it and as I was coding the data, I was looking specifically for what are the women describing as their unmet needs when they were in the class. Finish the letter. Okay. What were the participants describing as their unmet needs when they were in the classroom? And do sister circles have the potential to meet those needs? I don't think that I explained really thoroughly what sister circles are. I explained they are a critical group dialogue for Black women specifically to engage in these sorts of conversations. Sister circles have existed for a very, very long time. This is nothing new, and they were created during the time when social groups became popular. They had groups for Black people, they had groups for women, but there weren't any groups for Black women. The groups for Black people, those social spaces, those were for Black men. The groups for women, those social spaces, those were for white women. And so Black women sort of created their own space where they could be authentically themselves and really engage vulnerably with each other. So with all of that background, I used critical race feminism to frame this study. And the reason I use this particular framework is because it centers the lived experiences of Black women, and it creates an urgency around understanding, incorporating their experiences, addressing their needs, and acknowledging our assets. And for this study, I did just that in the context of education. How do the different policies and practices described by the participants incorporate their experiences, address their needs, and acknowledge their assets, or not? Let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Okay. So Sister Circle methodology is the approach that I use. This was created in 2015 by Dr. LaToya Johnson. And it's essentially what I just described as those sister circles, using that as a means of collecting and understanding data. And what distinguishes sister circles from traditional focus groups or other methods of collecting data from groups are these distinguishing features. So the first one is centrality of empowerment. So the whole goal of sister circles is to empower one another. And then also a researcher as participant, those two sort of go together. This is not a taking sort of approach to collecting data, it's a give and take. So myself as a researcher, I engaged just as much as they did. I didn't just facilitate a conversation with them where they were telling me all their business and I wasn't sharing anything of my own, but I also shared my experiences because it created a sense of trust among us so that they could tell me what they were going through because they knew a little bit about me too. And then communication dynamics. I'm going to play a couple of clips from it and you'll see how we were very authentic in the way that we communicated with one another, both verbally and non-verbally. There were no respectability politics. There was no, concerns about whether or not the way we were communicating was appropriate. We could just exist and be and express ourselves in a very free and authentic way. So after transcribing, coding, all that stuff with the data, the three themes, again, remember, I was seeking to understand, can sister circles be used as an effective way to meet the needs of Black women when they're still in the classroom? And so, ironically enough, the findings had the acronym PSA, which is the reason I say it's ironic is because critical race feminism, it amplifies the voices of Black women and it's sort of like, it centers their experiences and makes it, makes the issues that we face something of critical importance to everybody. And so PSA, protection, safety, and affirmation were the three themes that I identified as the needs that were unmet by my participants when they were in the classroom. So the first one, protection, I'm going to play a clip to sort of, I'm going to play two clips for each of these themes to sort of show how it showed up during the discussion. So this theme, it really captured how the participants had a need for a space where they were supported and protected from the different factors that were attacking them in their pedagogy. I don't think that I explained that well. So again, I'm going to play this clip because they did a much better job than I did.
Quite frankly, I kind of built this very hard shell, especially being in alternative education with I don't cry in front of kids. That's the no, I don't care what they're doing. I don't care what's going on. I don't cry. I've never cried. And when I started having panic attacks at school, I knew, even in that moment, I had to step out and go outside. I needed someone to watch my kids so that I could really human. Wow. And a child walked by, didn't even know me. Was like, "Are you okay?" And when I had to sit there and really lie to her face and was like, "Oh yeah, I'm fine, whatever." She asked me for my name and wanted my email. I said, "Well, I'm on the website. You can find my information there." But I got an email from a teacher later on. So one of my students said that they saw you, and I guess she went and told her like, "Hey, there was a teacher outside, crying," and I guess she just wanted to check in. So one of the biggest declines for me is when I could no longer hide it from my kids.
Wow. So that was Kiera, and as she was explaining, there was this, she started having panic attacks and she didn't know where to go to get the support that she needed, to get the help that she needed. And so this next clip, Toya is going to be speaking here and give.
Quite frankly,
there we go. So in this next clip, still under the protection, you can't see the title up here. This is still under the protection theme. Toy is gonna explain how she needed time and space to talk to somebody who truly understood what it was that she was going through.
That is good.
So being able to talk to somebody that understands what I'm saying when I say I feel isolated and unprotected, or I feel like everybody comes to me, but I have nowhere to go when I'm feeling down.
That's
Like,
correct.
you know, I was the strong teacher in people's
Right.
minds.
Right.
And so everybody coming to the kid
Yep.
and the kid goes nowhere, you know?
Right.
And so
I wanted to play longer clips, and I probably should have because I realized how fast I'm going, but I didn't want to just play the whole podcast for you all. But Toy in this clip again was talking about how she was everything to everyone. Remember the slide that I had a couple of slides earlier where there was the woman in the cape. There's no way for us to be able to take off that cape, be human, and receive what we need. If we take off that cape, then we are left vulnerable and we will likely be harmed. So as Toy said, you know, everybody comes to the kid, but the kid goes nowhere.
That is good.
so being able
And so this next thing, this is safety. And again, I'm just going to let, I think Toy goes first. Toy explain. No, I think I go first, actually. Yeah, I'm talking in this clip. And yeah, I explained the need for safety.
And another thing that I noticed when you all were speaking, you cared specifically, is when you talked about understanding why the needs of students were put first. Yes, students always come first when it comes to education. And also, I think as teachers in general, and especially as Black women who are also teachers, we're so used to being marginalized. We're so used to being pushed into the margins that we can't even fathom what it looks like to be centered, for our needs to be centered. For us to also receive the type of attention that we need to show up for the students.
That's true.
How are we gonna show up to them when we trying to hold in our tears for the
Right.
kids?
Not the 7 minutes.
So again, safety. Where can we be safe to get what we need? And why is it that Black women, we feel like, because context to what I was just saying, Kiera was explaining earlier, and Toy also did too, that, you know, I understand why there aren't mental health professionals in schools for teachers. And I understand why, you know, teachers are having to prioritize the health of students. I understand why that's a priority and why we're not prioritized. And that sort of started to become a theme. And I wanted to just focus in on that. Like, why can't both exist? And so in this second example, or the second clip,
Noticed.
Toy is going to give a very poignant example of what it looks like for her to not be safe.
I was at one time, this is when I knew the school that I left. I'm gonna call you out, Martin Luther King Middle School, because I was pregnant. And I still was being done like that. My class was still default ISS and OSS. And let me tell you something about my pregnancy. At 5 months, it's like, put me in some stirrups. I look like I'm ready to go. So it's not, it wasn't even like, you know, some people like they pregnant. Oh, look at her little belly. No, my nails was pregnant.
Not my name.
Okay, so I was pregnant. And so I'm waddling around and, you know, and they still like, girl, you tough, go ahead, get these kids. They won't even acknowledge my femininity in that particular point.
feel seen.
And the vulnerability that comes along with the condition that I was in. I'm not allowed. So ain't I a woman? That type of thing. Ain't I a woman?
Yeah.
And so they, when I wasn't able to do it during that time, I would get aggravated. You know, really? You don't want to do that? And it bothered me to no end. So
That was safety. So again, one of the unmet needs of the participants was a need to feel safe. And the final thing, affirmation.
And I saw this different.
Oh, that actually was the right one. For affirmation, in this first clip, Kiera is going to talk about what it was like to work in a more, she calls it a school of affluence. In the beginning, she talks about how she started her career at an alternative school, and then she moved into a different school setting, and she describes what it was like there as well. And this sort of highlights that it doesn't matter the environment that Black women are teaching in, a lot of the issues remain the same. They just show up differently.
And I saw this different, on the different end of the spectrum when you're dealing in a school of affluence and resource. I thought, okay, well, here I'm not gonna have to deal with such and such and such, which became true, but there were other things I had to deal with that I had never thought or even experienced. The level of need is just as great, just in this sense of I have to be number one, I have to be the best, I have to be, so I'm, in a sense, your personal servant. You need to answer my emails when I email you. If I'm emailing you, my child reached out to you, and you haven't reached back out, and it's only been 24 hours, my grades, my testing, I need to do it. It's so much need because there's this desire I have to finish at the top of my class. I have to go to UNC Chapel Hill. I have to be, everybody's fighting to be number one in this school, and everybody's fighting to be the number one scholar. So where does that leave you as the teacher? You have to constantly be rigor. You have to constantly, how do you challenge? And then, of course, being a teacher of color, you're being second guessed on whether you're able to do that.
I was gonna lift
And
it up.
not even just by parents, but by the student. I've had students try to correct me in class. Someone stood up, raised his hand and said, no, that's not right. When I was explaining about something about insurance in North Carolina, granted, I was right and he was wrong. But the fact that he was just able to just be like, no, that's wrong.
Wow.
That type of stuff. I always question, like, did he just do that? Because it's that constant, you don't want to in your mind, but it's just like, what else could it be? Because I'm up here, like, I do this every day. Like I'm competent, and it makes you question even your colleagues when you try to give suggestions, when you try to bring things, they're not taking it. They don't want, they'll try to act as if, yeah, this sounds good. Nobody's using it. Nobody recognizes that excellence. You don't get that recognition, and you and I remember, like, in the beginning, I had one of the highest degrees on the team. Wow. I had been teaching longer than a lot of them. And I felt incompetent. I felt like, am I not good enough? Like, and it's that environment that also will cause that mental break. It'll also cause that shift in that need in students that have to have everything because they're so used to having everything.
Absolutely.
That's a different level that I had never experienced before. And that played a big role in my combustion.
So I saw Brittany was having some reactions that resonated with you. I know that is the experience of quite a few Black women, at least that I've met and that I know, is that regardless of your accolades, regardless of how much there's always this question of, is she actually competent? And it shows up differently, as Kira was describing, in these schools where she's what she calls a school of affluence and resource. And so in this second clip, this is the last one, Toy gives, she, in a very similar but also distinct way, she talks about how her approach to teaching, her unapologetic way of centering the needs of her students, was met oftentimes with her being stereotyped or her competence just being undervalued.
So when somebody at a school of influence would try me to the left because I wasn't about that business, I ended up being angry, right? Because, first of all, have a seat. Because I had this, and this, and I wouldn't even go down. I had an energy about me, and it's like you felt like they were assaulted by your crown of intelligence. Like I feel assaulted that compared to getting knocked all the way out. When I'm in a space where there's not a lot of influence, because I want to advocate, it's problematic. When I come into a place that has more influence, and I'm still not cowering, it's an issue, like, oh, look, here she comes,
Mhm.
Sister Soldier, Michelle Obama.
Mhm.
They want you, if you're not smart enough, they want you to be like, they want to be able to humble you if you are very intelligent and very proud of who you are.
Right.
So protection,
So when
safety,
somebody,
and affirmation, I wondered how, with knowing that those were the unmet needs of the participants, and notice that none of them said money, none of them said a lack of resources, which is what the literature, what, previous studies have highlighted as reasons that Black people and Black women leave the classroom. It wasn't about those surface level items. And so when districts decide to give higher pay and bonuses, performative bonuses, those don't help the issue. Black women still only make up 5% of the teaching force, and that number does not change. Even though every year we get a lot more Black women, we lose just as many. And so maybe it's not about the money or the resources, but what those provide, which is, that protection, safety, and affirmation. And so I wondered, can sister circles give that? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. Sister circles provide what Kiara and Toy were discussing as far as needing a space to be able to just fully exist, to feel protected, for their wholeness, their whole being, their humanity to be protected and acknowledged. And as far as safety goes, again, sister circles are a space for Black women to feel safe, to feel like they don't have to put on, or they don't have to, in a different part of the episode that Toy was talking, I didn't play, she talked about how she always had to know everything as far as the standards go. So when it came time for observations, she knew where to challenge her administrators. She knew how to back up all of the things that she was saying, because she knew that if she didn't look out for her, nobody else would. And then finally, affirmation, like Kiara was saying earlier, did he just do that because just this questioning, this wondering, all of us, many of us, most of us are experiencing this sort of harm and isolation. And so sister circles can provide that space for us to not feel alone and to be able to process through those experiences and work together to move into these spaces of, or to continue empowering us and encouraging us to continue on in the good work. And so that's kind of where I leave things, is how can we establish sister circles organically, but also in a structured way, because we don't want it to be forced in schools, so that Black women or other affinity groups can come together and meet and talk about our very unique and specific issues and how we can work together to overcome them and to continue doing good work with them. And that's all I have. If you want to watch the full episode, this is the YouTube link. And yeah, that's it. I'm open to any questions. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
So, thank you for your presentation. It's always so great to see your face. Okay. So I'm thinking about the experiences of Black women in schools. And while the sister circle sounds like super dope, and I see it happening organically with, if you have Black people at your school,
Right.
Black women at your school to talk, but what if you're the only Black teacher at a
Right.
school? I think there's bigger structural issues that need to take place, like, the leadership of schools. Why, like, the leadership of schools don't tend to look like the students, don't tend to look like even the staff, a lot of the cases where, and so I'm just thinking about that. And also, well, that was the first thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I fully agree with what you're saying, and that is a consideration. I think that's why there has to be help on a broader level to establish these sister circles, because if it is an instance where I'm the only Black person at my school or the only Black woman at my school, how can we connect that person with somebody maybe at a nearby school, you know, to establish these spaces, just to give us access to other folks who might be going through the same thing as us, and give us the time and the structure to be able to meet if that's what we want to do, if that's something that we will find helpful. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Lee. I guess I'll just share a comment, which is that I think how you juxtapose, you know, that money was not mentioned among the participants, but that the literature will speak to, I guess, material concerns as reasons for teachers leaving the field. And I guess it just made me think about, you know, what does systemic change look like? And, you know, funding decisions, of course, relate to laws, policies, systems, but your talk is making me think about, is paying teachers more actually just like individualized solution to a larger systemic issue? And what does it take to change the school climate where teachers of color can be safe, protected, and affirmed, which would be more than just paying individual teachers, or giving teachers a higher individual take-home salary. And I guess, so that's just like, what's for me, and I guess I'm just wondering for you, what have you seen, or what do you think could be the possibilities of like, at least school leaders, if not policymakers, yeah, thinking about what could be done to change the climate for educators of color themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that's the burden, right? Because so the research does say that Black women report dissatisfaction with salary at higher rates than other groups. And that makes me wonder, once we do a deeper dive into their experiences, it makes me wonder, is it because like I'm putting up with all of this stuff and I don't get paid? So it's like,
Right.
I am more upset about the fact that I have a lower pay because of everything else that I'm enduring. But to answer your question, I guess my idea of placing these sister circles or just creating the opportunity to have these is one of so many ways that we can start shifting the culture of education. Because as you said, we can continue policy change, all of that is absolutely critical and necessary. The culture of education in schools specifically have got to change. It has to change from the core, like from the inside out instead of the outside in. But yeah, thank you for noticing that. Did you have a question?
It was kind of piggybacking off of her question of, are there any like is there an organization that kind of like helps to organize and create these types of spaces for Black women in schools? And like, if not, I guess, would that be something that would be helpful of like creating these sister circles and being able to kind of have them established like in districts and making sure that like administration is also like knowing that even if they don't want it, like that this is a requirement for the teachers in schools. Like this is something that needs to be made available to just provide a space for all, like for Black teachers, Black women in education, and just, yeah, just having that kind of backing. I think I was just curious if there's anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, similarly, that policy change is necessary. There are organizations that exist, but there's nothing nationwide. You know, I can think of some that I have researched in California. There are some that I've researched in Atlanta, but there's nothing on that, to my knowledge at least, nothing on a district level or a state level that I've seen that really requires administrators to at least provide the opportunity for folks to engage in this sort of community. So I think it is necessary. I think that again, this is only one idea, because the goal is to shift the culture. And this is one way that we can start to do that, because PDs are great, but what happens after the professional development? What type of accountability is placed on the teachers to make sure it's being, why can't I think of the word, implemented? So yeah, I mean, there are several different ways to shift that culture. And I think that is necessary, creating something that, whether they like it or not, administrators just have to create that space. Yeah.
So we have a question from an online participant. It's from Ravi. If it's okay with you, I can read it out. Okay, so the question is, what might be the implications of this important work in teacher education? How can we better prepare our new teachers to seek and even form these sister circles?
I love that question. So many implications. One of my favorites is to be more honest with folks about the system that they're entering. I think it is so important for us to better prepare our teachers to brace for impact, because we do a great job of getting educators excited and encouraged and empowered to do this really great work, but we don't necessarily equip them with the tools necessary to counteract the pushback that they are going to receive. If it's not on a individual level, maybe on a systemic level. One of the findings of my dissertation was that my participants felt like they were pushing up against the system that just wasn't budging. Even if they had all the support in the world from their administrators and they had a wonderful climate in their school, they still knew that they were engaging in harmful activities for their students. And so that sort of, that understanding that they started to develop created a sense of, or created issues with their mental health. So again, better prepare folks to understand the system that they're entering. And I think also there needs to be a component of mental health literacy incorporated into teacher education programs. That's another branch of my research, is how can we help teachers not only be able to identify potential mental health crises? What's the plural of that word? Crises? I don't know. With their students, but have the self-awareness to know when they're not okay, and what it looks like for them to take care of their own mental health, to sustain in the profession. I focus on teacher sustainability rather than, did I do that?
It just did it by itself.
Okay.
I don't know where it went.
Can they still hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm logged into your Zoom and everything looks fine here.
Okay.
I think so. I'll just monitor, and if we get any comments, I can let you know.
Okay.
I think we're okay.
Yeah. But I do think that there is a need for teachers to, that should be an integral component in teacher education programs, in my opinion, is that teachers are aware of their own health and how they are showing up for their students because of their health, and have tools and resources to know how to take care of themselves.
I was just gonna say, it's interesting that these exact same dynamics exist at the university level too. I was just thinking about, it doesn't happen in my math methods course, but when I taught urban education, I had the same dynamic of students kind of questioning if I knew what I was talking about. So, yeah, it's just like, it's the system.
And it's interesting because I only taught at one school. I taught for 5 years. And for the first 2 years, I taught general education, ELA, and I had a ball, I had a blast. And then my principal told me at the end of my second year that the following year she was going to put me in the IB program. And so the demographics of my student population shifted. And that is when I started to get questions. My competency started to be questioned. I also, from a student, was challenged in the middle of a lecture. And so it is very interesting, and it does make you wonder, is it because, but yeah, you're right, it exists on the level of higher education as well. I think about Black women who are professors, or even, in leadership in universities, and how their competency or their expertise is also questioned and scrutinized in ways that other folks just aren't.
I'm thinking, thank you, Dr. Lee. That was really amazing topic and just a wonderful presentation. I'm thinking as a teacher educator about the Black women students that I have had, which have been very few over the 5 years that I've been here. I can count 3.
Right.
3. And in each instance, they were, I don't want to say marginalized, but they shared with me that they did not feel included or welcomed by many of their peers. There were groups that were established, and it was just hard for them to break into those groups. And so my mind goes to what we here may be able to do or have not been doing so well at the GSD. I'm not saying that that's what it is, but just I'm willing to engage in a conversation about what they're experiencing and how we as an institution can help them feel good in this space. So maybe something like that for our Black pre-service female teachers is something that could be needed. That would be very beneficial. And I would be willing to join you thinking about that. And the reason I think it's important is because that's a very long period of time to feel isolated, right? As you're being preparing to become a teacher, and then you enter the profession, and then more years of isolation for however many years you are able to stay, and put up with it. That's a very isolating feeling. I've been there.
Yeah, it is true. Does that not characterize a lot of times, if we're talking about Black women who, for the duration of their education, have maybe been high achieving and maybe have been in these spaces where they might have been the only one? Is it something that a lot of us have grown used to? Is being included, our needs being prioritized, like I mentioned in that clip? Has that become a luxury that we almost feel like we don't have access to? I think that some of the ways we can start thinking about how to better support our candidates who are Black women is, Sister Circles is an option. I think it's also important that could be a helpful space too, because there tends to also be an assumption that because they are Black women, they automatically are culturally responsive, or they automatically know how to be a critical emancipatory educator. And so those spaces could allow them to be vulnerable in that, like, I didn't grow up that way, or I don't understand these components. And so, I think that is a possibility. And I also think another thing that teacher education programs could do is better center those pedagogies that historically Black women have sort of engaged in, pre-Brown versus Board of Education and post, allowing some of our Black female candidates to feel seen in that aspect, because a lot of times when they're engaging in these courses, what they're seeing and what they're learning doesn't always align with what is natural to them, or the type of pedagogy that they'll likely be engaging in once they enter the classroom. So I think increasing their visibility, being more intentional about the support that they get. In my previous job, I invited teachers specifically Black teachers to a conference by the Black Teacher Project, which is an organization in California who's working to support Black teachers. And I was challenged in that I should have opened it up to all teachers of color, or change the wording so that it says, this is open to teacher candidates. Don't say specifically Black teacher candidates, so that I'm not technically leaving anyone out. But folks can read between the lines, because it's called the Black Teacher Project, and know who it's for and who it's not for. And I pushed back against that, because the idea is that there has to be a very intentional, like, I see you, this is for you specifically. This isn't for everybody, and you're also invited to come, because that tends to be the culture of education. But it's like, no, I see that this is the specific need that you have, and this is the way that I'm going to support you in this. So I think, again, that's another way, is just to be more intentional about the support we provide. Thank you. That's a good question. You have a question?
It was more of a comment. I really resonated with what you said about implementing like mental health instruction within like the teaching program itself, because I feel like from the teachers that I spoke with at the school that I work at, especially with like teachers of minority, there's this pressure of like working harder than everybody else to kind of prove themselves, but in doing so they like put their own needs aside to put their students' needs first, and kind of like when you go on a plane, they tell you like, put your own safety mask first before helping others. Because how are you expected to provide and be there for your students if you can't be there for yourself?
Exactly.
So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Thank you. And one thing that I do love, I'm still learning the GSC, but what I love is that you all have a different major. You select a major for undergrad and then move into the GSC. And a lot of my students are psychology majors. And so that makes me really happy because it at least provides a foundation. But even to that, I think that it is still important to talk specifically about maybe having a lab, a course in a lab, maybe a minor. But it's important to talk, what does this look like specifically for teachers? How can teachers implement these different resources to support their own mental health? Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of teachers, all teachers probably can resonate with that they need more support with their mental health.
There's 2 questions online.
Okay.
If you don't mind, we can take one and then the next. So the first one's from Drew. He says, thank you for a wonderful presentation and podcast. If we agree that sister circles can provide invaluable support for Black women teachers, do you think the likely outcome would be greater retention or possibly less? Do you think you would have been more likely to stay had you had a sister circle in your school? And thanks again for your wonderful work.
Thank you. So more attention or less? I like a little bit of clarity on that question, but I actually did have a sister circle for my first 2 years of teaching. And I absolutely love Miss Wheatley and Miss Alberry. We met during 3rd block. We were the freshman English teachers. We would pray and sing and laugh and cry and plan together. And then when I moved into a different role, then I no longer had access to them. They were still at the school, but I wasn't meeting with them every day during 3rd block and, talking about what happened since last 3rd block. And I ended up leaving. So I don't know. That's a great question. I wonder if I actually have not thought about that. I wonder if I still would have had that sister circle because it made me feel so affirmed, especially as a brand new teacher. I wonder if I could have stayed a little bit longer if I had access to a sister circle like that.
I think you answered the question.
Okay, good.
So if it's okay, we have one more. This is from Brandon Johnson. And the question, it starts off, thank you for bringing up that point, Dr. Lee, but I'm not sure what it was in reference to. How do you think higher education administrators, specifically deans, address microaggressions from students and support minority faculties, primarily since teacher education classrooms reflect the disproportionate demographic matching of the nation's student population?
How do they or should they? Hi, Brandon. That's a good question. I think in a very similar way, just like Michelle was saying earlier, it mirrors what happens in higher ed. A lot of faculty members who are Black women receive these sorts of challenges. And I think that it is just as important for school or for school leaders on the university level to be intentional about the support that they provide to their faculty of color. Because again, we can only give what we have. We cannot pour from an empty cup. And if a lot of Black women faculty feel as isolated in their work as K-12 teachers. I hope that answers your question.
So, but I'll let you know if anything pops up.
Okay. I thought I saw a hand earlier before we went to the virtual questions. Yes.
I was curious, obviously, I'm not the target audience here necessarily, but I was curious if you have specific suggestions on how someone who looks like me can help, or specific things to avoid that you feel like people often think are a good idea, but actually aren't. You might want to share?
That's a good question. I actually get that question often, and I usually say, don't perpetuate harm. Just, do good. And in the full episode, they talk about how, Toy mentions how her classroom became the default ISS. Essentially, teachers who felt like they couldn't handle their students would send them over to Ms. Watson's class, and like magic, the student would pull out their work and, be no problem whatsoever, get their work done. And so it was all right. It was something that the same thing happened to me, and it happens to a lot of Black women. And it's okay, because my goal is to provide that space for my students. But also much needs to be done for those teachers who say they can't handle the students, to learn how to create a space where a student feels, because students need safety too, because learning is a vulnerable process. So there's a reason that my student is a saint in my class and they're wilding out in yours. They don't become a different human within the 7 minutes between periods. So yeah, I think that more work needs to be done in a lot of cases, not all, because there are some phenomenal teachers, but more work needs to be done to learn how to stand in those gaps so that Black women are always overburdened. That's a good question. Thank you. Any other questions?
I just want to say, so although I'm not a Black woman, I see how this talk is clearly relevant to someone like me. Given, I think, the kind of things that you're talking about and the kind of struggles that Black women are facing in and outside of the classrooms should be everyone's concern, right? I mean, I think the issue is that it seems like Black women often don't feel like they have power within that school context, right? So the system certainly in some ways is giving them voice to talk about shared concerns, issues that are aggregating within their school communities. And hopefully that translates into some kind of real power in the sense that they can dictate the conditions of their labor, have more of a voice in the school context, be able to talk about some of the issues that they're sort of experiencing in the collective. And I think what people like me can do, what other teachers can do who aren't Black women, can be to be very responsive to the kind of concerns that they lay bare when they come through and voice collective frustrations about their work environment and the conditions that they face in the classroom. And I think Black men in particular have a responsibility to do that, because I think some of the concerns that we face as teachers, and we know Black males are extremely underrepresented by some school teachers, right? That we only stand to gain from sort of being a part of those conversations and really amplifying the concerns that Black women bring to the forefront. So I want to thank you for addressing that.
Yeah, thank you. And, a large part of the reason that I focus my research on Black women is because the intersection of their identities, you think about the context of America, the white male patriarchy, anti-Black racism, Black women are at the center of all of that. And so meeting the needs of Black women means that everybody is going to be all right. And so, yeah, plus Black women always show up. Thank you all so much.
Good job.